The scent of salt and the old, familiar creak of the porch swing usually brought me peace. They were the sounds of my family's legacy, the foundation of my life. For 40 years, my father's business, the Mariner's Anchor Shipyard, had been the economic heart of our small coastal town of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We built durable, honest vessels, and our name, the Connors, was synonymous with integrity and meticulous craftsmanship. I, Samuel Connors, was the third generation to run the yard, having taken over after my father's heart attack when I was just 31. We were successful, not rich, but respected. The kind of respect that money can't buy. That all changed on a wet, miserable morning in June 2018. That was the day the MV Triton, a large ferry we had spent 18 months custom building for a prominent regional tourism company, ran aground just half a mile out of the harbor. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but the structural damage was catastrophic, exposing a fundamental, terrifying flaw in the hull's integrity. The subsequent Coast Guard investigation was swift, brutal, and focused on one key area: the welds in the central keel. The final report, a thick, impersonal document, didn't mince words. It concluded that the welds were dangerously substandard, a failure attributed to the shipyard's construction practices. The fault, the report declared in cold, damning language, lay entirely with the Mariner's Anchor. Within weeks, the entire local economy, which relied on our contracts and our reputation, began to crumble. Lawsuits piled up, insurance refused to pay, and the name Connors, once a badge of honor, became a slur whispered in the grocery aisles and the coffee shops. The man who delivered the final crippling blow wasn't a regulator or a lawyer. It was Victor Sterling. Victor was the lead structural engineer on the Triton project, a man I had known since childhood, someone I considered a brother. He was 3 years older than me, arrogant but brilliant, and the only other person outside my father who had the technical expertise to oversee that complex hull design. When the investigation started, Victor was the one who, with tears in his eyes, swore his loyalty to our name. "Sam, we'll get through this. It has to be a material fault, not our work." I checked those specs myself 100 times, he had vowed, standing in my father's dusty office, clutching a mug of coffee. But Victor had a secret, a fragile, brittle truth he was desperate to protect. His own father, a man obsessed with appearances, was battling a severe, career-ending financial scandal at his own firm. Victor couldn't afford to be implicated in any failure, especially one of this magnitude. When the Coast Guard narrowed the fault down to a specific, critical batch of welds, they called Victor in for questioning. He emerged an hour later, looking pale, but strangely composed. The next day, he released a public, televised statement that sent shockwaves far beyond Portsmouth. Standing beside his own lawyer, Victor Sterling delivered the fatal lie. He didn't claim a material fault. He claimed that I, Samuel Connors, the owner, had repeatedly ordered him to use a cheaper, inferior welding alloy and to falsify the quality control logs to save money on the already razor-thin budget. He presented fabricated emails and log entries, cleverly manipulated evidence that pointed directly to my desk. "I warned him," Victor said, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "I warned Sam Connors that his cost-cutting would cost lives, but he ignored me. I tried to cover it up out of loyalty to the Connors family, but I cannot in good conscience be complicit in this endangerment." The lie was perfect, calculated, and devastating. He ruined my family's name to save his own precarious position and his father's fragile reputation. The aftermath was immediate and absolute. The community turned on us overnight. People spat on my father's memorial plaque at the harbor. My wife, Eleanor, a local librarian, faced public shaming every time she went to work. I was not just accused of negligence. I was accused of criminal greed and endangering the lives of hundreds, all while Victor Sterling, the supposed whistleblower, walked away with his reputation intact, hailed by the press for his moral courage. The lawsuits turned into a wave of fury. We lost everything: the shipyard, the house that came with it, my father's savings, and the entire legacy built over 3 generations. By the time I was officially cleared of criminal intent, the courts couldn't find definitive proof that I physically altered the welds. The civil lawsuits had already ensured I was utterly bankrupt, my family name an ugly, toxic mess. Victor Sterling, meanwhile, was promoted, lauded as an ethical hero, and continued his rise in the world of high-end maritime engineering, his perfect facade completely untarnished. He had taken my life, my honor, and my future, and he had literally gotten away with a public, self-serving lie. I stood amid the auctioneers packing the final boxes from my home, gazing at the deserted shipyard, and felt a cold, quiet realization. This was not the end of the story. It was the end of the beginning. And Victor Sterling was about to learn that history, once wrongly written, demands a meticulous and painful correction. The day the auctioneers took the last of my family's furniture, leaving me standing alone in the echoing silence of the empty house, was the day my emotional structure shattered and reformed. I was no longer interested in clearing my name through the convoluted, uncaring legal system that had failed me. I was interested in dismantling Victor Sterling's entire existence. He had used a fabricated truth to build his current success. I would use a painstakingly collected, undeniable truth to demolish it. My immediate reality was brutal. I was 34 years old, jobless, penniless, and carrying the crippling burden of my family's ruined reputation. Eleanor and I moved into a tiny, rented apartment far from Portsmouth near Boston, where no one knew the Connor's name. I took a job, not as an engineer, which would have been impossible with the toxicity of my past, but as a night shift security guard at a manufacturing plant. The work was mindless, isolating, and perfect. It gave me endless hours of silence, fueled by stale coffee, to plan. My focus wasn't on getting even. That implied a temporary, emotional act. My focus was on architectural vengeance. Victor Sterling's career was his identity, his pride, and his most vulnerable asset. He had saved his father and himself by lying about the Triton's welds, but a man who commits one monumental fabrication rarely stops there. Arrogance, I knew, was a fundamental flaw, and Victor was dripping with it. He would assume I was broken, defeated, and too preoccupied with survival to pose a threat. That assumption was his next fatal mistake. My new mission became collecting irrefutable evidence of Victor's professional malfeasance, not just to prove he lied about the Triton, but to expose a pattern of deep-seated fraud and ethical compromise that would destroy his standing in the engineering community and lead to his criminal prosecution. I started by using my old professional contacts, the small network of honest maritime workers who knew in their hearts that my father and I were incapable of such negligence. I couldn't ask them for help. Their own careers were too vulnerable. I only asked for information. Where was Victor working now? What were his new projects? What subcontractors was he using? I discovered he had joined a prestigious national engineering firm, Ares Marine Solutions, and was quickly climbing the ranks, primarily due to his heroic integrity in the Triton incident. He was overseeing multi-million-dollar contracts, precisely the kind of projects where cutting corners could yield massive, untraceable personal profit. My first breakthrough came 6 months into my solitary existence. An old friend, a former supplier, tipped me off about a curious pattern. Victor was consistently using a small, obscure welding inspection company, North Star Certifications, owned by an old college acquaintance of his, Roger Finch. This wasn't suspicious on the surface, but Roger's company had zero online presence and seemed far too small to handle the massive contracts Victor was routing its way. This was the first thread I pulled. I spent my nights scouring public property records, tax filings, and corporate registrations. It took 3 months of painstaking, mind-numbing labor, but I finally found the crucial link. Roger Finch's company was being paid significantly more than industry standard for basic inspection services, but a substantial portion of that money was immediately funneled through shell corporations into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account, a subsequent deep dive revealed, that Victor Sterling had established 2 years prior. Victor wasn't just covering up an old lie. He was using his new position of trust to facilitate massive kickbacks and money laundering using Roger Finch as his clean front. He was now a criminal, not just a liar. I couldn't just present this evidence. It was circumstantial and could easily be dismissed as a disgruntled enemy's fabrications. I needed something physical, something undeniable, something signed and sealed by Victor himself. The key was Roger Finch. I knew Victor's arrogance meant he wouldn't just trust Roger. He would have him under his thumb. I needed a document that detailed their conspiracy, a contract, a non-disclosure agreement, something that tied Victor's clean public face to Finch's dirty money. The hunt began for the smoking gun, the physical proof that would not just ruin his career, but land him in a federal prison, the final and absolute payment for the 7-figure debt he owed me. The long, silent nights in that security booth, staring at the empty loading docks, were now fueled by a quiet, burning certainty. I was building a case that was legally flawless and morally absolute, an architectural masterpiece of cold, focused justice. I know this might just be a voice in your ear, but if the pain of betrayal and the quiet, stubborn fight for truth resonates with you, I want you to know you're not alone. We're all fighting a battle, seen or unseen. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you're not just supporting a channel. You're casting a vote for the relentless pursuit of justice and the power of a life rebuilt. And please, tell me what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had to embark on a long, solitary mission to clear your name or right a profound wrong? Your stories matter. They connect us. They remind us that the truth always finds a way out. I'm reading every single one. Thank you for being here, for sharing this journey with me. The problem with Roger Finch was that he was Victor's creature, loyal, dependent, and terrified of his master. I knew approaching him directly would be career suicide for both of us, and would instantly alert Victor. I had to create a situation where Roger was forced into the light, without realizing I was the one holding the spotlight switch. I spent another 6 months meticulously studying Victor's movements, his schedule, and crucially, his vulnerabilities. I discovered that Victor, despite his public facade of professional sobriety, had a crippling gambling addiction, a secret he maintained through massive credit lines and desperate high-stakes bets at an exclusive underground club in Providence, Rhode Island. This was the emotional weakness I needed to exploit. I started small. Using a complex, untraceable online identity, I began subtly dropping anonymous tips to the credit monitoring agencies Victor used, pointing to sudden, unexplained large cash deposits into his personal accounts, the kind of deposits that would flag internal investigations into his spending habits and income verification. This wasn't enough to expose him, but it was enough to introduce chaos and pressure into his meticulously ordered financial life. I wanted him to start sweating, to become careless, and, most importantly, to put the squeeze on his most reliable and most exposed asset, Roger Finch. The strategy worked perfectly. Victor's gambling debts mounted, his credit lines tightened, and the pressure from his internal corporate monitoring team at Ares Marine increased. Desperate for quick, clean cash, Victor began demanding a larger and larger cut of the kickbacks from Roger Finch, insisting on faster, more aggressive money laundering through the North Star certification scheme. Roger, already stretched thin, started to panic. His calls to Victor became more frequent, more frantic, and I knew the tension between the two conspirators was nearing its breaking point. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Victor's ex-wife, Sarah. I tracked her down living quietly in Vermont, having divorced Victor 3 years after the Triton incident, long before his current high-flying success. I introduced myself not as Samuel Connors, the ruined shipbuilder, but as a private investigator looking into severe ethical breaches at Ares Marine Solutions. I appealed to her sense of justice, showing her the evidence of Victor's offshore accounts and the disturbing pattern of his current fraud. She listened, her face hardening as she processed the extent of his deception. She didn't have the smoking gun, but she had the blueprint. Victor always kept hard copies, she told me, her voice sharp with residual anger. He was paranoid about digital traces. He had a custom-built, fireproof safe installed in his old home office, the one he still owns in Portsmouth. He kept all his insurance policies in there, copies of contracts, non-disclosure agreements, anything he thought could be used to leverage someone later. He calls them his contingency files. The name was chillingly appropriate. The safe, containing the documents that likely detailed the conspiracy with Roger Finch, and perhaps even the original unfalsified Triton welding reports, was the prize. Now I had the target, the safe, and the knowledge of its approximate location. I needed a way in. A physical break-in was out of the question. That was criminal and would instantly invalidate all my collected evidence, handing Victor the perfect defense. I had to use the system, the law, and the mounting pressure to force the safe's contents into the open. I decided to make my first move, finally, against Roger Finch. I had collected enough evidence of his tax fraud and illegal kickbacks to crush him completely. It was time to give him a choice, prison or freedom, in exchange for the truth. The confrontation with Roger Finch had to be perfect, precise, undeniable, and utterly devastating. I couldn't meet him in person. Victor would have eyes everywhere, and any direct contact would be used against me. Instead, I used a meticulously planned digital ambush. I sent an encrypted, untraceable email to Roger's private, personal address, an address I had uncovered through months of searching old college databases, with the subject line, North Star Certifications, Unreported Income and the Cayman Islands. The email itself contained no threats, only 3 attachments: a clean, clear copy of his untaxed bank transfer logs from Victor's account, a printout of the IRS form detailing penalties for severe, multi-year tax evasion, and most importantly, a single close-up photograph of the title deed to the offshore account Victor had set up. The message was simple: we know everything. Your partner is using you as a disposable shield. Roger called the burner phone I had provided exactly 17 minutes later. His voice was a frantic, terrified mess. "Who is this? What do you want? This is a mistake. I just handled the paperwork for Victor. He told me it was all legitimate consulting fees." The denial was pathetic, but the terror was genuine. I allowed him to panic for a full minute before I cut in, my voice low, calm, and utterly detached, the voice of an inevitable judgment. "Roger, your friend Victor set you up for 10 years of federal prison time and the complete financial ruin of your family. He is using your company as a front for money laundering and massive corporate kickbacks at Ares Marine. He knows the IRS will target the small guy first. You are the small guy, Roger, and I am not the IRS, but I have their number and I am holding their file." He cracked immediately. The weight of his own guilt and Victor's ruthless manipulation was too much. "He has documents, the contracts, the agreement that protects him and exposes me. He kept them in a safe at his old house in Portsmouth. He made me sign an NDA saying I'd take the fall. Please, who are you? Why are you doing this?" His desperation was the final key. "My name is Samuel Connors. Victor ruined my life and my family's name to save his own. Now you have one choice. You contact a federal prosecutor tomorrow, turn over all your banking information, and testify against Victor and Ares Marine for their multi-year, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. In exchange, I use my connections to ensure your full, truthful cooperation is noted, and I guarantee that the primary charges against you are reduced to a minimal level." I gave him the name of a federal prosecutor, a contact Evie Chu, my former legal partner, had established, and told him to call immediately. I didn't wait for his answer. I simply hung up, leaving him facing the impossible choice: loyalty to the man who was throwing him to the wolves, or self-preservation through full confession. Roger Finch chose survival. Within 4 days, the news hit the small world of maritime engineering with the quiet force of a torpedo. North Star Certifications owner implicates Ares Marine executive in federal kickback scheme. The media focused on the corporate fraud, completely missing the link to the Triton disaster. But that didn't matter. The federal investigation, fueled by Roger's full, self-serving confession and the financial records I had provided, instantly moved Victor Sterling from celebrated executive to primary target. Ares Marine, terrified of the public scandal and the regulatory penalties, immediately placed Victor on indefinite administrative leave. His perfect facade had its first, crippling crack. He was no longer a hero. He was a liability, and the company was already turning on him. The pressure on Victor Sterling was now immense and rapidly escalating. The federal investigation, led by the U.S. Attorney's Office, was using Roger Finch's confession and the financial paper trail to build an airtight case of wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate malfeasance. But the Triton disaster, the original lie that ruined my life, was still just a side note. I knew Victor would use the chaos of the federal investigation to try and retrieve his contingency files from the fireproof safe at his old Portsmouth home. The file that contained the truth about the Triton's welds and the written agreement that tied Roger Finch to the entire scheme. That file was the only thing that could completely exonerate me and criminally implicate Victor in the original scandal. I couldn't wait for the feds. They were focused on the money, not the decade-old lie. I had to create a distraction and use the legal system to get into that house. I called my lawyer, Eleanor's cousin, a relentless civil attorney named Marcus Dane, and explained the situation. Marcus filed an immediate, aggressive civil suit against Victor Sterling for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and wrongful termination of business, based on the now public information that Victor had engaged in a pattern of fraudulent and unethical behavior, making his testimony in the Triton investigation inherently suspect. Marcus didn't need to win the case immediately. He only needed discovery. We need the judge to grant us an emergency motion for a preemptive inspection of the premises where Sterling is known to store documents related to his current and past professional dealings, Marcus explained, his voice energized by the fight. Given the severity of the federal investigation and the defamation claim, we can argue the documents are at risk of being destroyed by a hostile party. It's a long shot, Sam, but it's our only clean shot at that safe. The motion was granted, but with severe restrictions. A court-appointed official would oversee the inspection, and Victor had to be present. The confrontation I had been planning for years was finally going to happen, not in a dark alley, but in the sterile, unyielding environment of a legal inspection. The day of the inspection was a cold, foggy November morning. I stood outside Victor's old home, now a monument to his crumbling ambition. Marcus and the court official arrived, and a moment later, Victor pulled up in his expensive sedan. He saw me standing there, Samuel Connors, the man he thought he had successfully erased, and his composure vanished. His face went white, the arrogance replaced by a frantic, sickening dread. You did this, didn't you, Connors? You set Roger up. You're trying to ruin me, he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and venom. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. You ruined yourself, Victor. I just gave the truth the platform you tried to bury. The inspection began. Victor tried everything to stall, claiming attorney-client privilege and personal privacy, but the court order was absolute. We finally reached the home office. The fireproof safe was there, precisely where Sarah had described. I need the contents of this safe, Victor, Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. They are pertinent to the discovery in the civil case. Victor resisted violently, his entire body shaking. No, that's personal. That's confidential. He knew what was inside. He knew the absolute ruin that the Triton file represented. After a tense standoff, the court official warned Victor about obstruction of justice, and in a defeated, utterly broken move, Victor finally, desperately, opened the safe. And there it was, a sealed yellow envelope marked, Triton Contingency My Assurances. The truth, patiently hunted for years, was finally in my hands. Wow, you've stayed with me through the darkest, most complicated part of this journey. We've seen a lie exposed and a truth reclaimed. The weight of that injustice, the years of silent planning, it all comes down to the documents in that safe. If you've ever had to sacrifice everything for a principle, for the simple, powerful need to be heard and seen, then you understand the depth of this moment. I need you to know that your support, your presence here, is what keeps these truths alive. Please, hit that subscribe button and let your voice be heard in the comments. Be warm, be real, be you. Tell me, if you could choose one person in history to tell your life story to, who would it be and why? And what other true life stories of moral comebacks do you want to see? Your suggestions shape this channel. Thank you for making this community a sanctuary for justice. Let's see what was in that envelope. The Triton contingency envelope contained not just one, but two devastating documents. The first was a signed, witnessed non-disclosure agreement between Victor Sterling and Roger Finch, detailing the full extent of their kickback scheme at Ares Marine, the undeniable criminal proof the federal prosecutors needed to ensure Victor's immediate indictment and conviction for wire fraud and money laundering. The second was the true prize, the original unfalsified welding quality control report for the MV Triton. The report, dated just 2 days before the vessel's launch, explicitly detailed the correct, high-grade welding alloy and the meticulous passing quality of the welds that had been performed at the Mariner's anchor. The report then contained a handwritten, initialed addendum from Victor Sterling, stating that due to a last-minute, unscheduled test run of the ship by the tourism company, he had been instructed to immediately remove a small, non-critical support beam to expedite the launch, an action that required him to cut into the main keel in a way that was never meant to be done. The report confirmed that Victor Sterling himself, acting on his own authority or the company's, was the one who introduced the fatal structural weakness, not my cost-cutting measures. He had cut the beam, then used the resulting structural failure to frame me for incompetence and greed. The sheer staggering depth of his betrayal hit me with a force that almost buckled my knees. I handed the documents to Marcus Dane without a word. His silence as he read them was more powerful than any exclamation. When he finished, he simply looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound respect. "Sam," he said, his voice low, "this doesn't just clear your name. This is a full, complete legal reversal. This proves you are the victim of fraud and he was the perpetrator. We can now add felony perjury and obstruction of justice to his list of crimes, and we can sue the original tourism company for their role in the unauthorized test run." The legal escalation was swift and absolute. Marcus immediately filed the Triton contingency documents with the court, forcing the reopening of all the original civil suits against the Mariner's Anchor. Simultaneously, we turned over the full Finch-Sterling conspiracy documents to the federal prosecutors. The legal world had fractured, and the shockwaves began to ripple through the regional maritime industry. Victor Sterling, already on administrative leave, was immediately fired for gross misconduct by Ares Marine and became the target of a joint federal and civil investigation. The press, which had once lauded him as a hero, now dissected his career with cold, professional savagery, his name a byword for corporate corruption and personal malice. Victor was arrested the next day. The news footage showed him being led out of his home in handcuffs, his perfect facade completely gone, replaced by the broken, panicked face of a cornered criminal. He tried to deny everything, claiming the documents were fabricated, but Roger Finch's testimony and the clean, physical reality of the original quality control report were insurmountable. He was booked on multiple federal charges, his future a certainty of prison time and total financial ruin. I watched the coverage on a small, grainy television in my rented apartment, not with satisfaction, but with a deep, consuming sense of final, absolute quietness. The debt had been paid. The truth had won. The immediate aftermath of Victor's arrest was a dizzying whirlwind of media attention and legal maneuvers. The story, a celebrated whistleblower being exposed as the villain who framed a respected family business, was a sensation. Reporters camped outside my small apartment, eager for the story of the shipyard owner's vengeance. I declined all interviews. My revenge was not for public consumption. It was for the restoration of my family's honor. My only public statement was a brief, concise release through Marcus Dane, confirming the document's authenticity and thanking the federal authorities for their diligence. The statement ended with a simple, powerful line. "The name Connors stands for integrity. It always has, and it always will." The priority shifted to the civil front. Marcus Dane, armed with the new evidence, moved with the precision of a master craftsman. He was able to get all the original civil lawsuits against the Mariner's Anchor dismissed with prejudice, completely clearing my family name of any financial or professional liability. The shame that had burdened my life for years was finally lifted. The community of Portsmouth, realizing their profound, terrible mistake, began a quiet, ashamed campaign of apology. People I hadn't spoken to in years, people who had spat on my father's plaque, began leaving flowers and handwritten notes on my doorstep. My wife, Eleanor, walked into her library job the day the news broke, not to whispers of scorn, but to a spontaneous, quiet round of applause from her colleagues. We hadn't just won a case. We had reclaimed our social dignity. The lawsuits were then reversed. Marcus filed massive targeted suits against Victor Sterling and the tourism company that had ordered the unauthorized test run that led to Victor's cover-up. The tourism company settled almost immediately, terrified of the public fallout and the inevitable discovery of their own dangerous negligence. The settlement was substantial, a large enough sum to not only repay all my debts, but to purchase a new large property, and crucially, to re-establish the Mariner's Anchor shipyard with a foundation of complete financial security. My father's legacy was not just cleared, it was rebuilt, stronger than before. Victor, however, was broken. Facing decades in federal prison for the combined charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and perjury, he had nothing left to lose. He refused to cooperate, maintaining a stubborn, arrogant silence that masked his terror. His financial assets were immediately seized. The entire fortune he had built on the foundation of my stolen life was frozen and destined for restitution. He had his reputation, his money, and his freedom stolen from him. A precise, absolute reversal of the ruin he had inflicted upon me. The silence from him was the final, sweetest confirmation of my victory. He was no longer a powerful enemy, but a defeated ghost. The restitution funds arrived 6 months later, a massive wire transfer that represented the complete financial vindication of my family's lost wealth and reputation. The first thing I did with the money wasn't a frivolous purchase. It was a necessary act of emotional reclamation. I bought back the original sprawling plot of land where the Mariner's Anchor shipyard had once stood. The auctioneers, the banks, the courts, they had all been obstacles, but I had successfully navigated the legal labyrinth to reclaim the very soil that held my family's history. The land was overgrown, the buildings dilapidated, but the name Connors on the deed was all that mattered. My wife, Eleanor, was my rock throughout this time. She had endured the public shaming with quiet dignity and had supported my lonely quest for truth without ever once questioning my sanity or my purpose. We celebrated the victory, not with a huge party, but with a quiet evening at the harbor, placing a new, untarnished plaque on my father's memorial, one that bore a single, simple word: truth. She looked at me, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "You didn't just win a lawsuit, Sam. You taught a lesson in resilience that this town will never forget. You are your father's son." I set about the meticulous process of rebuilding the shipyard, not as a monument to revenge, but as a living testament to integrity. I hired the old crew back, the men who had been forced out of work when Victor lied, giving them back the dignity and the stable life that had been stolen. I oversaw every structural detail, every weld, every financial decision with a ruthless, ethical precision that was born out of my trauma. The new Mariner's Anchor wouldn't just build ships, it would build trust. The final piece of Victor's ruin came at his sentencing. He was convicted on all federal counts, and the judge, noting the cold, calculating malice of his actions, delivered a harsh sentence: 15 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for a decade, and an order for full financial restitution that would ensure he lived the rest of his free life in abject poverty. The judge made a point of noting that Victor's own contingency file was the ultimate evidence of his betrayal. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Victor Sterling, the once celebrated executive, was reduced to a number and a criminal history, his perfect facade irrevocably shattered. I hadn't attended the trial, but Marcus sent me the full transcript. I read the judge's words, the final unassailable declaration of his guilt, and felt the immense final weight of the burden of revenge lift from my shoulders. The chapter was closed, not by anger, but by the quiet finality of justice. The years that followed were the years of true, genuine peace, the kind that is earned through fire and forged in resolve. The Mariner's Anchor reopened its doors exactly 2 years after Victor's sentencing. We started small, focusing on custom, high-quality projects, and our reputation, now legendary for our ethical foundation, soared. The Connors name wasn't just cleared, it was sanctified by the story of our survival. I no longer had to look over my shoulder. The ghost of Victor Sterling was locked away, and the truth was free to breathe. I often thought about the man Victor had become, the defeated, desperate figure I had seen in the courtroom footage. He had committed the ultimate act of self-destruction. He had traded a life of modest success and genuine friendship for a temporary, fragile moment of arrogant triumph. He had thought he could erase me, the inconvenient truth of his failure, but in the end, I was the one who erased him. My victory wasn't just financial, it was existential. I had found my true, formidable strength in the fight, a strength I never knew I possessed when I was merely successful. I received one final, unexpected message, about 3 years into Victor's sentence. It wasn't a letter or a phone call, but an anonymous legal document filed with the court, a motion from Victor's remaining family to formally disassociate their surname from his crimes, completely severing all ties. The final line of the document confirmed that Victor Sterling had been permanently disowned by his own aging father, the very man Victor had sacrificed my life to protect. The circle was complete. Victor had ruined my family's name to save his, but in the end, he had lost his own. His sacrifice was for nothing. His ruin was absolute and complete. I sat in my new office, looking out at the rebuilt shipyard, the clean, smooth lines of a new vessel taking shape. The scent of salt and fresh-cut lumber filled the air. I had chosen a different path than Victor. He chose the quick, dirty lie, I chose the long, meticulous truth. He chose personal profit. I chose ancestral honor. The moral weight of my victory was the only thing that mattered. I had shown the world and myself that integrity is not a weakness. It is the ultimate, non-negotiable strength. I had rebuilt my life, my name, and my business on the unshakable foundation of the truth Victor tried so desperately to bury. My life now is a testament to the power of the long game and the enduring strength of a clear conscience. I didn't just get my shipyard back, I got my identity back. I learned that when someone tries to steal your name, your past, or your future, you must not fight with their weapons of emotion and malice. You must fight with the weapons of truth, strategy, and unyielding patience. I used Victor's own arrogance, his confidence that I was broken, as the core vulnerability of my counterattack. I built a flawless legal case piece by piece, fueled by a cold, intellectual resolve that never wavered. I have found true peace. The anxiety, the shame, and the crushing sense of injustice are gone, replaced by a quiet, deep satisfaction. I walk the streets of Portsmouth now, not as the scapegoat, but as the man who fought back and won, the man who reclaimed his family's legacy from the abyss. My story is no longer one of tragedy, but one of profound, undeniable redemption. Victor Sterling ruined my family's name to save his, and in return, I spent years meticulously collecting proof to not only end his perfect facade, but to ensure his final and total destruction. He thought he got away with it, but the truth, once unleashed by a wronged man, is the most powerful and absolute force of all. I stand here, whole, wealthy, and respected, having proven that honor is the only currency that lasts. The lesson I leave you with is this: do not let the betrayal define you. Let your measured, dignified response to it define them. Find your truth, pursue it relentlessly, and ensure that the price the betrayer pays is complete, non-negotiable, and absolutely final. I am Samuel Connors, and I rebuilt the foundation of my life stronger than it ever was before.